Okay, I'm seeing the participant numbers grow. So I think I'll move in and get us started and launch us on this 27th webinar in this series from NEXUS Gains. So as you can see by the title, this webinar centers on transboundary multi-stakeholder platforms, and in particular, how to design one. So multi-stakeholder platforms have constituted a key area of work in the NEXUS Gains program, and there's a few of us that have been working together in the NEXUS Gains program that have worked in the Incomati Basin of Southern Africa. So we'll dive into that experience today. Next slide, please. And before I go too far, I'll introduce myself quickly that I am Jonathan Lautsey from the International Water Management Institute. I'm based in Southern Africa, and I'm a research group leader. Yeah, so I'll just provide you a very brief context on this Incomati Basin. So the Incomati Basin is in Southern Africa, shared by 3 countries. It flows from west to east and drains into the Indian Ocean. It basically starts in the highlands of South Africa and Eswatini, and then flows south and drains out into Mozambique. There's a map that you can see there on the left, upper left of your screen. Institutionally, one of the key issues, or one of the key developments within the Incomati has been the establishment in 2021 of the Maputo Watercourse Commission, which is referred to by short as INMACOM. So that's been kind of key development in the basin, helped to get cooperation moving. And as part of that, NEXUS Gains has moved in to support. So as you see there at the bottom of your screen, the NEXUS Gains program has worked to support INMACOM and Incomati on 2 key activity areas. So there's a first area that's centered around model development. And that is like a basin-wide model development to support dialogue around transboundary water reallocation, which is a key area of focus that the new INMACOM is working to facilitate. And then the second key area in which the NEXUS Gains program has intervened is the focus of today, which is this co-design of a transboundary multi-stakeholder platform, which will support direct input by stakeholders into basin management and basin decision-making. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of the program for today, I just wanted to briefly provide a welcome and context at the beginning in 3 or 4 minutes, which I've done. And then my colleague, Ryan Naring from IFPRI, will describe the role of MSPs in basin management to elaborate just briefly a key thrust of what we tried to do when we co-designed this work in the Incomati was to learn from other experiences in shared waters and MSPs. And so Ryan will highlight some key lessons from that review of experience and outline how there's a key value to be added by MSPs at a basin level and how that can inform thinking in the design of the Incomati MSP. That'll be followed by a presentation from Dominique Joachim from Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo. And he'll go right into the design of a new MSP for the Incomati River Basin. Following that presentation from Dominique, we'll have a panel discussion with representation from the Nile Basin Discourse, which is an MSP in the Nile, from ZAMCOM and an MSP there in that river basin, the Zambezi, and then from the Global Water Partnership as well. Following that panel discussion, we'll conclude with closing remarks from INMACOM, from Buyani Fakudze, who will offer up some thoughts on the viability of this MSP design and ways forward. So there's a couple pictures on the right. We partner with a number of key partners on this, but the central one is INMACOM. And so we just put their logo there. And then there's a picture from one of our workshops. So with that, I think you can close out my presentation and we'll hand it over to Ryan Naring. Ryan Naring is an associate research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, based in Washington, D.C. His research focuses on the political economy of food systems and natural resource governance. We'll hand it over to Ryan to give his talk. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm assuming you can hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So thanks. Yeah, I'll jump right into some of the research that is part of the NEXUS Gains program and how that's informing the co-design of the MSP and the Incomati. Jonathan already mentioned a bit, sorry here. There we go. Jonathan already mentioned a bit about the NEXUS Gains Initiative, part of the CGIAR research programming. This research is kind of a collaboration across what we call work packages or different thematic areas of research within the initiative. So governance and then some of the work on water productivity. As part of this initiative, we're working at the geographical scale of river basins. So this presents a unique research opportunity specifically in the transboundary context, which has a series of different governance challenges. And that's essentially what I'm going to be presenting on today, our research on those governance challenges, and more specifically, the relationship between MSPs and formal governance institutions in the transboundary context. So our research approach, we really wanted to look at what is the governance function of MSPs in relation to existing state-based formal organizations. And we found that, among other things, MSPs are particularly important in the transboundary context because they serve a unique role relative to that of the formal organizations, which almost always are river basin organizations. And so these river basin organizations are really the representation of national governments at the transboundary or basin level to ensure that national interests can be negotiated such that there is not a lot of conflict and there can be different issues resolved. And so we looked at a series of different river basin organizations, those that have MSPs, a few that don't. And then we conducted some key informant interviews and looked at a lot of their design documents, such as terms of reference or a series of other documents looking at how they approach this question of MSPs in relation to governance. Many of those key informant interviews, or key informants rather, are luckily here today, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them. And we found one of our conclusions, or our main argument, is that MSPs can serve a fundamentally different governance function than state-based transboundary organizations or river basin organizations, but it depends on the place and the design. And I'll walk through a bit of the key types of approaches in designing an MSP in the transboundary context. So for a definition, we have struggled with this a bit. There's a lot of different definitions for multi-stakeholder platforms or multi-stakeholder forums, processes, dialogues, and partnerships. In the case of the transboundary context, we define them as the institutionalization of integrating multi-scalar and multi-sectoral stakeholder voices and interests over time into river basin governance. And there's a series of values of MSPs. So I've listed 4 of them there to the right. And I think that the first 3 are in the transboundary context, very valuable, but maybe not specific to any MSP. And so I really want to focus on this last one. We found that information sharing upstream or integrating stakeholder voices into river basin governance is really key, but also downstream. So how river basin organizations can share information on, for example, river flows or climate projections, flooding. This is really sort of a key function of MSPs, and especially important at the transboundary level where you have, something that might happen upstream will affect people downstream at varying degrees at a different time. So Dominique will be following me to present more on the specific case of the Incomati. I just want to introduce it here briefly, and specifically some of the institutional context that's unique here. In each of the countries, there are what are called catchment management agencies, and this is a bit unique to the Southern Africa context. And these catchment management agencies are really the sort of operators at the catchment level, so a subnational level. They have very close relationships to a lot of the water users or stakeholders in their catchments. And so they play a fundamental role in trying to integrate a transboundary MSP, something that Jonathan already mentioned. Then if there's INMACOM, which Jonathan also mentioned, and we're lucky to have Buyani here today. And INMACOM's function is really trying to ensure that national government interests are represented at the basin. And so you have this multi-scalar sort of governance institutions. On the one hand, the subnational operators working with stakeholders, and on the other hand, a basin-wide organization representing national governments. Now, this is not always the case. And so, as I mentioned, we looked at 3 different RBOs or basins and how they approach the design of MSPs. And then the first one is the Mekong Basin, which is really what we call a state-based MSP. In this basin, national governments really have the responsibility to involve and integrate stakeholders at the national level up to the basin level. And so it really falls on them to incorporate stakeholders. The MRC or the RBO in the Mekong, they're ultimately responsible for stakeholder engagement at the basin level, but they rely on these governments to ensure the involvement of their stakeholders. Some of the important achievements in the Mekong Basin are that they've had a lot of work on inclusive development. So things like building a dam have been crucial in involving stakeholders. But yeah, there's really a lot there. And unfortunately, we don't have the Mekong Basin here today. The second one is the Nile Basin. And here there's a very unique approach, which is what we call semi-autonomous MSP. And here you have the Nile Basin Discourse, and we're lucky to have Engineer Matemo here today, the director. This is a non-governmental organization that functions as the MSP in the basin, and they work with a memorandum of understanding with the RBO, the Nile Basin Initiative. The Nile Basin Discourse is funded by international donors, whereas RBOs are typically funded by national governments. And among many achievements, and we're going to hear about some of those today, they've really been crucial in normalizing relationships between transboundary communities. And so there's numerous examples of the construction of a dam or some sort of infrastructure project. Well, they'll bring together communities being involved across borders to ensure that there is no conflict. And again, normalizing those relationships beyond any sort of infrastructure project. And lastly is the Zambezi Basin. Also, we're fortunate enough to have a representative here from ZAMCOM. This is the RBO in the Zambezi Basin, and their approach is really based around ZAMCOM itself, or the RBO. And so here, ZAMCOM organizes national level MSPs and then aggregates them together at what they call a watercourse-wide MSP. One of the key achievements, again, out of many, for ZAMCOM's MSP is the establishment of rules and procedures for data and information sharing that really makes not only a transparent process, but also ensures that information sharing can benefit all parties involved in the governance of the basin. So lastly here, I just wanted to show from some of our research, we put together this sort of conceptual diagram of the different governance functions that a multi-stakeholder platform can play in terms of basin governance. And so this is somewhat unique, I guess, to the Incomati Basin, although it could be a national MSP, for example, in the case of ZAMCOM. But you really have two different ways to channel stakeholder voices. On the one hand, if you think about more traditional political processes, whether that's voting or being involved in any sort of political process, citizens may have a direct channel to their national governments or other governmental levels to ensure that their voices are being heard via their national governments at a river basin organization. On the other hand, through this basin level MSP, it provides an alternative channel for stakeholders to then provide their voices or their perspectives at the RBO. And this is really key because you could think of many scenarios in which stakeholders within a country might have different interests, but yet a national government is responsible for representing them. Or there could be similar situations where stakeholders in different countries have similar interests, and therefore any interaction between them, whether within the country or at the basin level, this alternative means of participating in the governance of a river basin organization could be really key. Now, as I mentioned, with the three different cases, there is sort of this relationship between the basin level MSP and the national governments or the river basin organization that is still to be defined in each of the contexts. So yeah, this really key for our research is trying to determine how our RBOs and MSPs are negotiating disparate interests at these different levels. I mentioned this is based on some ongoing research. We have 2 papers under review. I'd be happy to share those if you reach out to me. and my email here is at the end. I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Good presentation. And just to provide a bit of context while Dominique gets ready, one of the interesting nuggets that we uncovered is there's not a lot of stock taking of MSPs and shared waters, so we kind of stumbled into quite a gap here. So the three he presented, we like to think that was the first comparative assessment across MSPs and shared waters to mine those experiences, to derive lessons that can be of use to other shared basins like the Incomati. So that now leads us to the design of the Incomati experience, the Incomati MSP, which was then informed by these other experiences. And design of that MSP was led by our colleague Dominique Joachim, with support from us and support from others, I'm sure, to kind of pull lessons from these other experiences from other international river basins. Okay, so Dominique Joachim is an assistant lecturer at Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo, Mozambique, and he's a researcher in the water and climate sector. So Dominique, over to you to introduce the Incomati multi-stakeholder platform.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. As Jonathan and Ryan introduced, we are designing this Incomati multi-stakeholder platform, and I'll get into the details. So before we try to design or develop this platform, we made an exercise as to know who are our stakeholders in this basin and what are the key sectors that we have to accommodate or that we have to include or call into our MSP. From the work done in Eswatini and Mozambique, it's still on the course in South Africa, we saw that agriculture is the primary development sector in the basin, but we as well have to look into reservoir storage, dams. Some are being built and they will change how water is allocated or distributed. Industries, we have economic zones in South Africa, and we have sugarcane plantations, big sugarcane plantations in Mozambique. And we have as well the water supply, the domestic water supply. You cannot forget that people need water to drink, and in Maputo City in particular, water supply is dependent on Incomati waters. So, as Ryan said, we have these different demands for water, and we have different institutions that are managing water. In South Africa, we have IUCMA, and stakeholder engagement in South Africa is managed through the catchment management forums. These catchment management forums hold meetings every 3 months in each sub-basin, sub-catchment, sorry. In Mozambique, we have a different scenario. We have a basin committee, a fixed basin committee with representatives from the different sectors that is managed by the catchment management institution that is Arasul. In Eswatini, the information that we have is that there are administrative subdivisions. They help foster these channels for community participation and communication, and then relay that information to the water management institutions. Now, we have what we can call a multi-country, transboundary forum that is managed by Incomati Basin Water Authority, but that it focuses on matters of operational aspects regarding water resources management. And INOCOM, one of its key goals is to develop a platform that can represent the stakeholders, and the stakeholders can go there and discuss and have how can you call it, deliberations that are representative for the entire basin, because we have these different subdivisions here, but they are not connected in any way. So when we have IUCMA with one decision, we don't really know how that can impact downstream. So that's one of the reasons why we are designing this this transboundary multi-stakeholder. That's the main reasons are that we need a platform from which we can derive decisions that are integrated, that can advise governance and management of water resources, in which stakeholders can share discourse and have a mutual understanding in all the sectors and the scales, and in which the stakeholders are represented. And we talked about agriculture, industry, dam management. So all those sectors, we need them talking to each other so that decisions can impact no one in a wrong way. Now, this Incomati MSP, the main roles or the main objectives of this Incomati MSP is to facilitate stakeholder communication and participation, because it's from the stakeholder. We need to give voice to the stakeholders so that then the management institutions can come in and provide a link between INACOM and the subnational stakeholder committees, because as I said, we have these different forms of engagement from the stakeholder committees, but there's not a link between them and INACOM. And support implementation of activities from INACOM, and communicate the deliberations to INACOM, and undertake stakeholder assessment and engagement reports that can inform us how are the stakeholders being engaged in and how effective that is. But I'll touch on that later. So our structure is this that you can see, not really on the top, but let's say who oversees this MSP will be a coordinator appointed by INACOM, but who leads meetings, because I'll talk on the meetings later. We need to have meetings that are involve all the stakeholders, and who leads those meetings is someone that we'll call the director. Now, members are representatives from the catchment management agencies, representatives from the national water management institutions. We are talking ministries, for instance. So that's government. CMAs are not necessarily government, but more to management. NGOs and stakeholders from agriculture and other sectors. So this is to both ensure multi-scale and multi-sectoral representation. Now, how are we thinking about this MSP coming to fruition is through face-to-face meetings. We want our stakeholders to go to a place and meet, discuss, deliberate, and then those deliberations are informed to INACOM and the governments. This meeting location, so that no one is a protagonist for a long time, will rotate every 2 years among the countries. We have 3 countries. So the thought is in 2 years, these meetings happen in one country, then the next 2 years in another, and it rotates. The meetings, as I said, are moderated by the director. The director is not, he also has a 2-year mandate. So the director follows, is from the host country. That's what I thought. And we can have extraordinary meetings, virtual meetings, and correspondence as well. That is to be sent to the director or the coordinator. If we want a direct line to INACOM, that would be with the coordinator. If they want to discuss something for the meetings, we can talk to the director. And the issues raised in the MSP in the discussions can be channeled to INACOM Secretariat. They have task teams, and these our reports can be presented to the Executive Secretary of INACOM. Now, our deliverables, as I said, we have a stakeholder engagement report and stakeholder assessment report. The stakeholder engagement report is to evaluate the effectiveness and the efficiency of communication that is to know if we are engaging in the right modalities of interaction, if the meetings are coming to fruition and stuff like that. And the stakeholder assessment is to say, do we have the right representation of the stakeholders in this MSP? Which members can be replaced, or who else do we need to invite as guests, for instance? Now, in terms of funding, this MSP will be funded by the Jeff project, and we have funding for and it accommodates face-to-face meetings, as that is our primary way of dealing with this MSP. And thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Dominique, for the presentation, and thanks, Ryan, for the presentation before that. Yeah, just watching it from my side, one thing I'm noting that cross-cuts your two presentations or links them, which is quite interesting. I noted Ryan presented this framework of options around MSPs and shared waters can be state-based. And I think the example he gave was the MRC. And then another option was semi-autonomous, which was like the Nile. And then the last one was RBO-based MSP, which was similar to the Zambezi experience. So my interpretation from what you presented is that what you're proposing for the Incomati is more like the RBO-based, given the linkages to the RBO there. But maybe we can revisit this in the context of the panel, which we'll transition into now. So I'll ask each panelist as I introduce you to turn on your camera, and then you can continue to leave it on as we transition into the panel. So I'll start with Ms. Leonisa Abuino Munjoma, who is an information and communications specialist working with the Zambezi Watercourse Commission, ZAMCOM. Leonisa has worked in the Zambezi for many years with different organizations, specifically around stakeholders at different levels. Nice to have you join, Leonisa. The second panelist who's going to join us is Ms. Lorraine Catillo, who's a transboundary water governance and environmental specialist at the Global Water Partnership Southern African Office. She provides leadership on delivery of transboundary global environment facility international waters projects. Good to have you join us, Lorraine. And last but not least, we have engineer Sylvester Matemu, who is an expert in transboundary water resource management and cooperation. He's a former executive director of the Nile Basin Initiative Secretariat and currently is a regional manager of the Nile Basin Discourse. That is the multi-stakeholder platform for the Nile, which is a large regional network of more than 600 civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations. Okay. So it's good to have you three now join us. This is great to fire away and get us going on a panel discussion. So first off, let me just, before asking any specific question, just open it up. We heard a nice presentation from Ryan that reviewed different experiences in MSPs and shared waters and really wrestled with the kind of theory of the value add of transboundary water MSPs. And then we heard a presentation from Dominique, which started to lay out the parameters and modalities and design of an MSP, a transboundary MSP for the Incomati. Can I just open it up and see if you guys have reactions to any of those preceding presentations, particularly Dominique's that laid out kind of a design of a transboundary MSP. Could I ask Leonisa, would you willing to go first and offer some reactions?
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm clear. Thank you for inviting ZAMCOM and yeah, for having us. And thank you very much for that presentation. And I want to congratulate you for taking that step, the Incomati, for that step of ensuring that they put in place a strategy for stakeholder engagement. It helps a lot. Some RBOs, us included, we've had to do it along the way, not right from, the beginning, so it becomes a challenge. So thank you very much on that. I just thought maybe there was need to also include stakeholders such as the finance ministries who explain the challenges that we've had for, being water-centric initially and then now moving to multi-stakeholder approach and the need to ensure that in all the stakeholder consultations that we carry on, we need to involve ministries of finance, especially if you are dealing with government, and also the issue of private sector engagement and all. Otherwise, it's a good start, and I commend the presenter and also the work that has been put. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Leonisa from Zemcom. Let me now ask the other RBL representative before we get to GWP. So Engineer Matemu, would you like to offer any reactions on some of the preceding presentations?
Thank you very much for that. Is a good start for the Incomati. By design, it looks like it is intergovernmental kind of approach, whereby the intergovernmental approach with the bureaucratic processes sometimes give no breathing space for the stakeholder, and in particular the grassroots level, really to air their voices. So maybe during my presentation of the Nile Basin discourse, because I have worked with the intergovernmental basin, big one like Nile with 10 countries, and also I worked with Zamcom also. I was, as Leonisa have alluded to in the previously. When you take things through intergovernmental, you will follow those bureaucratic processes and the decisions. You cannot go otherwise. You cannot have a divergent kind of ideas out of the what has been prepared by the national governments. So you need whistleblowers like independent stakeholders that really may come and say, you plan this way, but I think the priority for us is this one if we want to achieve. So this is what I would like to reflect on and to discuss further. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thanks. So you're highlighting kind of the value add of MSPs, this kind of independent voice that can kind of hold national governments to account to some extent. That's interesting. Noted. Let's move on. Lorraine from GWP. Now you've heard a couple presentations and now a couple reactions to those presentations. Do you have any observations or comments from your own side? Thanks.
I think mine would actually ride a bit on the last two submissions, and I was thinking from the angle of let's say sustainability, and from a resource sustainability perspective for the multi-stakeholder platform. So from the governance frameworks that were presented in the first presentation, I would like to think that a semi-autonomous kind of framework, which is not necessarily based on the, let's say, national structures aggregating to the river basin level, probably augurs well for let's say, resource sustainability in terms of the contributions of the players on the multi-stakeholder platform. I think it rides as well on the point made by Engineer Matemu regards the, let's say, government structures and how they are funded and how that aggregates to the RBO level, whereby for a semi-autonomous structure, that aspect of, let's say, financial or resource sustainability then becomes independent. And I think that creates more opportunities actually around long-term sustainability. And scope.
And scope was your last word. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, so this, I did have a question on my list, which was farther down. Maybe we'll move it up, centered on this issue of sustainable financing. So maybe we can bring that out more centrally, because I think it is an interesting one. If we're being honest, transboundary river basin organizations routinely face issues of financing, probably not unlike other issues in the developing world or other aspects or other projects. And it's something that needs to be thought about concretely. Now, in terms of MSPs, I think when there was some deliberation, and maybe Dominique or Ryan could chime in on this one, but when there was deliberation on the Incomati, I mean, there was a feeling that sustainable financing may be actually more difficult if it was an independent, if the idea of the proposal for the Incomati was independent rather than more directly linked to INMACOM. There was a thought that linkage with the RBO could help provide more, diversion of funding to support the MSP, and then going it alone or going more independent like the Nile may actually drive more challenges on financing. But maybe we'll have a round on sustainable financing and see if there's reactions on that. Maybe we'll just go in the same order, starting with Leonisa. So can you talk about your case of the Zambezi funding multi-stakeholder platform activities there? Has that been an easy task or a challenge area? Is that something you can elaborate on, or is there a certain model that you're pursuing, Leonisa, to ensure reliable financing for stakeholder engagement activities in the Zambezi? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, we do have a certain financing model that we are trying to pursue, but I do agree with the previous colleagues that have spoken, Engineer Matemu and Lorraine, with regards to issues around sustainability. I have to point out that there's need to be creative, when it comes to funding these MSPs to ensure that they are sustained. And so when we started by establishing, the national stakeholder coordination committees. Before we actually graduated to calling them national multi-stakeholder coordination committees. So initially, ZAMCOM had, up to now, we still have a budget within our work plan. We include, at least one meeting for the national stakeholders coordination committees. That is if we do not have a project that is requiring to consult stakeholders. So we have a budget which has reduced over the years as the countries are also institutionalizing the stakeholders coordination committees. And apart from that, we also ride on co-financing from our partner organizations. For example, we had a project that we were running with the Worldwide Fund for Nature on development of an IWRM strategy and plan for the Kwando River Basin, which you all know is a sub-basin of the Zambezi. So that funding for consultation for MSPs came from funding from our partner. So what we do is we make sure when we are discussing certain funding with partners, we incorporate in that budget the stakeholders platform consultation meetings, as well as their own meetings to discuss other issues. And also some of the projects that we have had, for example, the strategic plan for the Zambezi River Basin, its development, we incorporated a budget for holding stakeholder consultation meetings at national level, as well as when we were developing the nature, people, and climate investment plan for the Zambezi recently, we also incorporated a budget line for stakeholder consultations. So it's something that requires, creativity and also, cooperation from partners and strategic partners. And as well as involving the private sector. We haven't been very successful in terms of private sector, but we are moving that direction. I think I can end here.
Okay, great. That's helpful. So just one point of clarification. So when you mobilize resources for stakeholder activities, as I understand, the resources go to ZAMCOM, and then within ZAMCOM, they're directed. That's correct. Okay. So now, yes. If I understand right, that constitutes an interesting contrast to the way Nile Basin Discourse does it, which they're more of an independent entity. Engineer Matemu, I'll propose you jump in here and clarify on this so that they can directly mobilize resources, and then the resources do not necessarily need to go through the NBI, the Basin-wide River Basin Organization, to then reach the NBD, the Nile Basin Discourse, which Engineer Matemu leads. Instead, you can mobilize resources, and then they go directly to Nile Basin Discourse for stakeholder activities. Is that correct? And do you want to maybe elaborate on the benefits of that model? Thanks, if I got it right.
Yeah, that is very correct. Unlike other MSPs, whereby I said they collaborate and they get their resources through the river basin organizations. For NBD, this is different. And the basis of this is that in 2000, before establishment of the Nile Basin Discourse 2003, there was a meeting of the ministers responsible for water of the Nile Basin and the consortium of development partners. And one question which came up that time was, ministers were asked, with a lot of this hydropolitics and a lot of work, and with a big area of the basin, can you really do justice to the stakeholders, and in particular to the grassroots communities? The answer was no. And from that point, then it was decided, with the support of the countries, to establish Nile Basin Discourse. Discourse means conversation, as to stand alone, a kind of a civil society, and that will work hand in hand to leverage and support the vision and mission of the Nile Basin Initiative. From that point, then Nile Basin Discourse was allocated fund direct, and in terms of any project that really they negotiate to be implemented within the Nile Basin, Nile Basin Discourse as a civil society has a stake, must be there, and that funding go direct to the accounts of the Nile Basin Discourse. This is the operation which have shown a lot of achievements up to today. And because of this independence, we have really supported the NBI to reach the grassroots level, and to avoid, as they have said, previous speakers, to avoid the conflict, like the Rusumo hydropower project, which is a Nile Basin project. Then with the 3 countries, there is local area development program, whereby there are some projects that are connected with the implementation of that big project. And for that matter, that was our responsibility to mobilize those resources, because we know the language, how to speak with the grassroots level. When it happens that the national governments wanted to talk with their respective national stakeholders, some they become reserved. They do not have that freedom of speaking freely what they feel like. So we did that, and it has shown a big success.
Yeah.
Second, development partners have been really supporting NBD, but this is project-oriented. It has a life. And then after the project, then what? What we are working on now is a financial sustainability in terms of crowdfunding, establishing the reserve fund, and also issues like consultancy and others. So this is what we are doing, and the registration fees, because we have a network of 600 civil society and NGOs, and the governance have decided every member must pay membership fees.
Yeah.
And if you pay membership fees plus that, it is enough to sustain when there is no development partner support in terms of projects. That's how we are moving. But we haven't done very much in that area. But starting from next year, we have a new project which will start in January. And this is one of the activities of resource mobilization, going all those kind of approach for financial sustainability.
I wanted to ask you one clarifier on this point. So, I mean, I think I'm sold on the relative merits of your more autonomous approach. I get it that gives you more freedom to kind of convey stakeholder voices and opens them up to not channeling them by a national level. That's excellent. So, but my question is more around the replicability of this approach in other basins. So, I mean, interpreting what you said, some of the points you made earlier, you highlighted that you worked in the Zambezi, and I think now you came to our workshop in the Incomati earlier this year. You've seen the presentations. I think you have a sense about the Incomati context as well. And I'm sure you're familiar with many other international basins. Do you think this model is replicable in other basins, or do you think it has to be large ones like the Nile with a decent sized donor presence to achieve this? Thanks.
I think this is because Nile Basin Discourse is 21 years, more than 21 years old. And this have shown a lot of achievements, so it is replicable. But important here, our success are hinged on the confidence of the governments of the countries that they trust, because civil societies or NGOs are perceived to be like going against the government policies, challenging it, and so on. So there must be a good working relationship and a confidence that this civil society really can work with the government and can benefit the people at the grassroots level. I think this is something which is not easy. It takes time, but we need to nurture it and make sure that it is well established.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's give Laureen a chance to offer up any reaction on any of the threads just discussed. Maybe I won't pose a question, Laureen, but just give you space if you want to add anything.
Yeah, just to follow up and say, after listening to both Leonisa and Engineer Matemu, I think something like a hybrid, semi-autonomous. Why am I saying that? When we listen to Leonisa, she's speaking more to, let's say, RBOs based, which is the contributions from the member states in terms of financial sustainability. But she did say you have to be inventive, you have to write into programs with ICPs and so on. Some of the requirements, resource requirements of, let's say, perpetuating those platforms. And I'm remembering a specific case, like at the regional level now, not at the RBO level, at the regional level, where I think for the last RBO's workshop that was held in the region, it had very minimal ICP support, just because it was, the support was not available. So for such a context, then when you cannot, let's say, find resources within programs and from the member states for whatever prevailing reasons, which may be global, regional, or national, that semi-autonomy aspect becomes very useful, because I'm thinking there are opportunities around, which were highlighted by Engineer Martin, around resource mobilization from the stakeholder players themselves. He mentioned private sector. Of course, it's still, some of it is just still theoretical, like frameworks in terms of engaging private sector and having them, contribute meaningfully in the long-term sustainability of this platform. But it's an opportunity which I think, if that perspective of thinking from a hybrid, semi-autonomous, is opened up and integrated, then it creates opportunities. And here I'm commenting on the Incomati framework. It will create opportunities for financial sustainability. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, that's the thing. You're right. So when you talk about the Incomati, if this wasn't apparent already to people listening, I mean, it's a smaller basin. And one of my theories is that bigger basins get a lot of the focus, but conditions in some of the smaller basins, are also quite relevant, but they don't necessarily get the same degree of focus. And in Southern Africa, where Laureen and I are based, there's quite a number of them: Bupusa, Incomati, Ruvuma. But then donor interest is not always the same as some of these larger ones. And so attracting donor financing in a sustainable way, picking up, I think, on a word that Leonisa said earlier, you need to be creative, I think. So, yeah, so we have about 5 minutes left here in this panel before we hand over to Buyani to close us out. I had a couple more questions, but I'm also noting that there's been a couple questions in the chat, this Q&A. So I think we can pick up on one of those. And it says, let's see. There was a question around wanted to know how basin level MSP are constituted, ? Who are the members of the platform and how are they selected, nominated from the countries? Do they have national representation roles? Leonisa, did you understand that question? I can read it again, or can we start with you maybe to offer a response in the case of Zambezi?
Okay, can you repeat? I heard
I can
who are the
I could repeat.
stakeholders and
So this is a question from Murray Agbon Lahore. So that person asks, they want to know how basin level MSPs are constituted. In other words, who are the members of the platform and how are they selected or nominated from the respective countries? And then I think they're asking, do they already have national representation roles? So are these like key people in ministries that are just nominated, or are they outside ministries, or do they already have prominent roles in countries and then they're just now nominated to play this role in the MSPs, or who are these people? I think they want to wrestle with some of the specifics, and I think it's a fair question. Yeah, so can you talk to that in the Zambezi?
Okay, let me try to talk to that briefly. As you know, with the Zambezi Watercourse Commission, it's a river basin, and our approach, as you know, it's as a river basin, which is an intergovernmental organization. So the way we started with setting up the MSPs, which actually are semi, what was the word that Dr. Rain said? Because it's
semi-autonomous.
Yeah, semi-autonomous. Our entry point are the ministries of water, because we are obviously a water-based organization. So we set up terms of reference. We drew terms of reference, in which we highlighted the importance of stakeholder participation at different levels and different sectors, including, NGOs, civil society, and all. So because we guided them in terms of the participants who should be part of that establishment, they also listed who they were going to include and shared with us. Each country shared with us. So we had an agreement after seeing they had incorporated, different sectors, including NGOs. And one of the issues around governance in the TORs was that the chair can be the Ministry of Water or the Director of Water, but a secretariat has to be sitting in an NGO or a civil society organization. So I'll give an example of Malawi, for example. Their secretariat sits with the GWP country office. They have the country partnership offices around the country. For Mozambique, it sits with ARA Central. It's now ARA Central. It used to be ARA Zambezi. And in Namibia, it sits with the Zambezi board in Katima Mulilo. So there's that semi-autonomous kind of operation in which we have given the civil society also to be part of these establishments. So as to who, I'm sure I have answered. The requirement is that it has to be multi-sectoral. So not just multi-sectoral in terms of ministries and government organizations and government, but also civil society, NGOs, also private sector. They have to be all involved, and partners, even ICPs, those that are within the countries, can also be part of those national stakeholders coordination committees. And what was the other question?
I think you nailed it. I think think it's good. I'll just ask Engineer Matemo if he wants to add anything on that point, if the process is kind of broadly similar to what you described in the Zambezi, or if there's any interesting variations in the Nile, Engineer Matemo.
I wish I could show the organogram of the NBD, but because of time, I will try to explain, to respond on the question.
1 minute if you have it. We
Our
have to wrap up.
structure,
Yeah.
our structure is a bit different. We have the General Assembly, whose members are 3 members that are selected at the national level. So we are having 10 countries, so we'll receive 3 members from the 10, so you will have 33 people sitting in the General Assembly. But also under the General Assembly, there is a, that is the summit. Above, under the summit, we have the General Assembly and then the board. Now, how is the constitution of the regional board? Every country have national, what we call national discourse forums. And these national discourse forums has members and they have their own board. And they select, when they sit at their national board, they select 1 member representative to the regional board.
They
so
vote
you will
internally?
have, pardon?
Do they internally vote? They decide among themselves by popular consensus or what?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, at the national level, because the members at the national level are from different sectors. Yeah. So they sit and nominate 1 member which they represent to the secretariat as a member of the regional board.
Okay.
So we will have 10 members of the board, but at the national level, there are national discourse boards. And below the national discourse boards, there are local discourse boards also.
Okay.
The purpose here is to
we need to wrap
avoid
up.
creating.
Yeah, I think that's great, Engineer Matema. I think we need to protect a couple minutes for Incomati at the end, but I think you gave an excellent overview already. So I'm going to have to step in. And I'd like to just hand now to the Incomati Maputo Watercourse Commission Representative Buyani Fakudze. Can you wrap us up, Buyani, and give us some final words?
All right, sure, Jonathan. Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone once again. So I could just say it's been an insightful session because as it was highlighted in the introduction, we've been in the process of trying to set up a proper multi-stakeholder platform. And for us, as Incomati, it has to get to the point where we see how our objective as an RPO can meet the direct needs of water users on the ground. So for us, we have that overriding mandate to ensure equitable and sustainable management of the resources in our 2 basins. And that has to translate to actual actions on the ground. So I'll give an example. For us so far, we have had a budget for stakeholder engagement, and we felt as a new RPO we should tie it to creating awareness about the existence of Incomati. So we attend trade shows, symposiums, and things like that. But now, as we engage with water users in those platforms, a lot of direct issues that affect them come up. For example, the issue of sand mining, which has affected the flows from South Africa into Mozambique, and the farmers in Mozambique are getting less and less water. And Incomati, with a stakeholder platform, would be ideal to address such issues. And I would also mention that what has come out and is worth thinking about for us is a sustainable funding model for this MSP. It would be also the issue of staffing a dedicated stakeholder management unit, and also to find a way to capture the lessons and how to come up with a resource center based on everything that we learn throughout those engagements. So far, I would say Incomati tries to find a balance between the wishes of the different member states. And naturally, it's a balancing act because they have different laws and policies, but we have to try and find common ground. And then filtering it down to the stakeholders, we look at the different categories. So we need to also know who is where, So far, we've had a lot of engagement with the academic sector, but we want to filter it down to irrigators, to students, to women and vulnerable groups like that. So these are all lessons that we're picking up from these engagements, and something that we need to take forward. So I think I would wrap it up with those. I'm trying to quickly go through my notes, but it's just to appreciate all these learning experiences. And I would say we have had internal discussions to engage more with the more experienced RPOs like Zamcom. And of course, we've had Engineer Sylvester before. So these engagements have to continue as we try to solidify the work of setting up our MSP. Perhaps I can leave it there. Back to you, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you, Buyani. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. I think we're a minute over, so we'll close it out. And there'll be another webinar, I think, in 2 weeks. So thanks again, everybody, for making time today. And we look forward to keeping in touch on MSPs. All the best. Bye-bye.